Welcome to the Emmie FM Society of BC's annual AGM presentation. My name is Hilary Robertson, and I serve as co-chair of the Board of Directors of the Society. We respectfully acknowledge and thank the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations on whose unceded and traditional territories we are privileged to come together as a community to learn and to understand. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Louis Nacul. Dr. Nacul has recently joined the Complex Chronic Disease Program as Medical Director. As you may already know, Dr. Nacul is a doctor and general practitioner with training across medicine, epidemiology, and public health. Dr. Nacul previously held the position of Clinical Associate Professor and Researcher at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in London, United Kingdom, and led the Cure Emmie team and the UK Emmie CFS Biobank. As noted in welcome notes posted to the CCDP website, Dr. Nacul's position will have dedicated research time in addition to his clinical and administration work, which is a huge asset to the program. His research expertise will inform the way we treat patients and open the door to new discoveries. We are honored to have Dr. Nacul here with us today and look forward to his presentation and to this opportunity for our members and community at large to engage in conversation. The lecture will be approximately 45 minutes, and then we will facilitate questions and discussions for a further 45 minutes. For those on live stream, you can note your questions on the chat, which we will then be brought forward by our volunteers. Those present in the auditorium, there is paper and pencil available up here if you want to grab it to take notes while Dr. Nacul is talking, and then there are mics in front of your chairs. Without further ado, welcome Dr. Nacul.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to be here today. Can you hear me or no? So I need to come closer to here, right? Okay. Right, thanks everyone for coming here, and thanks for those who are online, and thanks for the society to invite me to give this presentation today. I'd like to start by just showing a few words that were written by Emily Collingridge. I don't know if you have come across her. She was a young, beautiful woman from the UK who passed away in 2012. I think she was the first, if not the first, the second person in the UK and probably in the whole world to have in her death certificate the recognition of Emmie as one of the causes of death. This is what she wrote just soon before she passed away. I'll just write to you: as I lie here wishing and hoping and simply trying to survive, I should at least have the comfort of knowing that there are many, many well-funded scientists and doctors who are pulling out all the stops in the quest to find a treatment which may restore my health, and that the NHS, National Health Services in the UK, is doing all possible to care for me as I need to be cared for. But I don't. The wretched, ugly disease is made all the more so through the scandalous lack of research into its most severe form and the lack of necessary, appropriate support for those suffering from it. This is something that must change. So she wrote this 7 years ago, or just over there, and I wonder if she were alive today, if she would write the same thing or not. And of course, although she was in the UK, this, I believe, is relevant for patients anywhere in the world who have the same problem as she did, i.e. Emmie. This presentation is an attempt to try to address the issues that she raised there. I haven't met her, unfortunately, but I heard of her, and I think she was an inspiration for many. So during this presentation, I'll go through the evidence on burden of disease, or how common and how significant impact is of ME on people's lives, causes and treatment. And then I'll say some words on how I believe the research can be moved forward, and then the implications of research to clinical practice. So I'll start by the burden of disease, and I'm going to show this slide, which is, I don't have a pointer here, but everything is well pointed there. So this is what we did in the UK primary care, and we estimated how common it is, or the prevalence of ME at a particular point in time. This is a large population, 140,000, and we found a prevalence of ME/CFS of 0.2%. This is 2 over 1,000. Of this, that there was an excess of women compared to men, so it's about 3.5 times as many women than men. And when we applied the CDC criteria, those who are familiar, that was the prevalence we found. But when we applied the Canadian consensus criteria, the prevalence was about half of that. So that's what we found because we did a study in general practice in primary care, and we realized that many people never reach primary care, and many physicians, like GPs, never diagnose ME. I believe this is an underestimate of the real burden. So I believe the real burden is about, or the real prevalence should be in the region of 4 per thousand, or 4 per thousand with 0.4%. And I'm saying that because this is a very often quoted prevalence. Of course, there is some variation. This would give a prevalence of 20,000 people in BC and about 150,000 people in Canada. However, we see quotes for Canada as having over 500,000 people with ME. So there is a lot of imprecision in the estimates. And if you look here at the very top, there is the study that I just mentioned about where the Canadian criteria is used, and it came to 0.1% prevalence. And then we have prevalence from a range of other studies, including our study, when you use Fukuda criteria, 0.2. And we are actually near the lower range of prevalence rate. So this may be because we use very stringent or very specific criteria to diagnose, and the other reason is because we did in primary care rather than population level. And of course, different researchers and different people use different criteria to diagnose. The variation here is about 100-fold in the prevalence in different studies. Could be a difference in the population study, maybe a little bit, but of course, I would say the most important reason for the difference in prevalence found in different studies is the methodology and the application of clinical case definition. However, there are very consistent indications that the quality of life in ME is severely impacted. So if you look at your left-hand side, you can see what we found in our population when we compared ME with people with with people with multiple sclerosis and other disabling disease and people who are normal. And what we can see here is that this slide here, the outer dots are for people who are normal. And when we apply this instrument, which is called SF36, we have 8 different scores, and then 2 scores which are summary scores. So in total, there are 10. Without going in detail to all of them, what I can tell is, what I can see very easily, I hope, is that the outer part of it, of normal people, they have scores around 50 and 60. That's what a normal person is. And then the second one, which is the dotted lines in green, are people with MS, with multiple sclerosis, which can be quite a disabling disease. And of course, they have more significant impairment than normal people. But then what is striking here is that for all the 10 indicators we looked at, people with ME have even lower scores, demonstrating or indicating that people with ME tend to be more severely affected in terms of the functional ability to do things, or have lower quality of life than people with MS. And when you look at the other graph, it's an older study that we conducted. In this case, we are comparing people with ME CFS in the very bottom, and both for men and women. And what you can see is that for all scores, ME has people with ME have lower scores compared to people with cancer, depression, rheumatoid arthritis, and to normal controls. So there are other studies by other authors who found similar things. So it's quite extraordinary that the effect on the ability of people to work, to study, and to conduct the activities of daily life is so impaired on average. Of course, there is a range of severity. Some people are more or less severe than others, and some people with relatively mild disease can actually remain in employment. And this graph here shows what happens when we compare healthy controls of people with ME and MS in terms of employment. I would like only to look at the orange dots. The orange dots show healthy controls. Here we have that about 10% of the population that we study were out of work or working up to 16 hours per week. The middle one is people with ME CFS, and you see about 75% were either not working or working reduced hours. And this is significantly more than people with MS, where we found a percentage of people out of work working reduced hours of between 20 and 30%. So this shows the impact on the ability to work by people with ME, even compared to another disease control, that's how we call, i.e. people with MS. And when it comes to income, the analysis here is a bit different. So the green line shows the income reported by people with ME before they developed the illness. And the red one indicates what happens after they develop the illness in terms of income. So if I, is there any pointer here that I could use, or if not, that's okay. But okay, thank you. Sorry for that. But in any case, thank you so much. Okay, so that's one. Can you?
Green button.
Yeah, I'm pressing the green. Never mind, sorry for that. So let's move on. I think you can see, if you look at the second one, you have income under £10,000 per year. It's pretty low income for British standards. And you see that before onset of illness, people with ME, about 20% of them had income less than that figure. But when we recruited them into the study, having ME, this figure doubled. So 40% of people had incomes which were less than 10,000. And then as you go to your right in the graph, you can see that the green bars actually get bigger. This means that people who had higher income before is much higher than people who continue to have higher incomes at the time of disease. So, in other words, this just shows that people with ME CFS, they lose income. It's not news for you, I'm sure. But nevertheless, it's important when we have evidence for that we can show and share with people who may be less familiar with ME. Right, so let's go to the causes and potential biomarkers. So in terms of causes, we know still little about, but this is a list of what is frequently reported in the literature. Infectious trigger is very, very commonly reported, so about at least 2/3, probably more than people with ME, start with an infection. And Epstein-Barr virus, which is the cause of glandular fever or mononucleosis, is one of the causes, but not only one. There are lots of other infections that can trigger ME. What we haven't found is enough evidence that there is a persistence of infection during the disease. So it looks from the current evidence that this is more like a trigger. Other insults and environmental exposures can also trigger ME/CFS. Age, we know that it is a disease that affects all age groups, but there is a higher prevalence in young adults and in adults around the age of 30 to 50 as well, and predominantly in women. And we still need to find more on the genetics causes of ME, but I'm sure there will be some markers there when the proper studies are done. This is our study of risk factors, and here we compare ME with MS. I just want to look at the first column where the number is. So when you have lower income, 3.48 means that people with ME have a risk of having lower income about 3.5 times as high as people with MS. They are about 3.5 times as likely more likely than MS to have to be single, and 6 times higher risk of having had frequent colds and flus in the past, and about 5 times higher chance of having had an infection before the onset of the illness. We also did a comparison with healthy controls, and these figures are much higher than that. I think the interesting thing here is that we're comparing to another disease group, i.e. of those with MS. Infection before disease onset appear here as a significant risk factor for the development of ME. You may have seen, some of you, and those who are interested in scientific reading or on the scientific aspects of ME/CFS. If you have not, I would highly recommend reading a recent paper by Anthony Komarov, a very highly respected physician and professor from Harvard in Boston, United States. And this came in JAMA, which is Journal of American Medical Association, which is a very high impact journal. And in this paper, he talks about increasing evidence of biological abnormalities in ME/CFS, and particularly abnormalities in the immune system, nervous system, endocrine system, and energy metabolism. The beauty of this paper is a short one. It's very succinct, and I think it's very elegantly makes the case for ME as being a physical disorder, although I particularly don't like this distinction, but I think it's important to have papers such as that. And this actually reflects many other papers around. There is a proliferation of papers in the literature suggesting abnormalities in these systems in particular in people with ME. So what none of these papers actually report to is something which I found particularly important, which is the fact that the abnormalities that occur in ME are not static. As in any chronic disease, the abnormalities, the type of abnormalities will change with time. And this is the hypothesis we raise. So it's not confirmed, although there is quite a bit of literature suggesting that this might be the case, on what happens in early disease, i.e. soon after developing ME, and then in advanced disease, and particularly in more severe cases. So this is what may happen. In the beginning of disease, we have a lot of inflammation, or this means that the immune system is overactive, is working very hard. Our metabolism is in full speed. There is, in terms of autonomic nervous system, pardon me if this is nomenclature that you're not familiar, but this is the fight and flight response in our organism, which is the sympathetic response to events. And then I believe there is a high energy consumption in the beginning of disease, and this is one of the causes of fatigue in early ME. And the reason for that is because you need a lot of energy to keep the systems going because they are all over-activated. However, in more advanced disease, I think the opposite may happen. So rather than having a lot of inflammation, the immune system quiets down. The metabolic pathways slow down a lot, so our metabolism is slowed. And we come into a status of, rather than fight and fight of the sympathetic nervous system, we come to the resting state of the parasympathetic nervous system. And at this moment in time, the problem is not high energy consumption, but rather low energy production. And that's where I believe mitochondrial dysfunction becomes more important. And homeostasis refers to the equilibrium in our organism. And at the beginning of the disease, I think there is some form of homeostatic compensation. Something goes wrong, but our system adapts. But as the disease advances and become more severe, in the cases that become more severe, the organism probably loses the ability to compensate for changes. Or in other words, they lose the ability to regain homeostatic equilibrium. And I think the response of the organism to this, when they no longer cope with the stresses in the body, inside the body, is that they will shut down the system. That's why hypometabolism and low inflammation. This is only a hypothesis, so it might be completely wrong in saying that, although to formulate a hypothesis, you may have some idea that there might be something right there. However, what I could say, even if it's not right, it may help explain why results of studies are so inconsistent. There are many other reasons why, but when you have mechanisms of disease that change with time, and then sometimes they become the complete opposite. If you put a bunch of people together and try to make sense of the information, people will be in different phases of their disease, and at the end of the day, everything, when you do the analysis of your findings, you don't find anything, because you come to an average of nothing is going on or something like that, if that makes sense. Okay, everybody? Right, so potential biomarkers, that's something that we need, there's no doubt about. We need a diagnostic test. We need molecular markers and clinical markers that will help us distinguish people with ME from those who are normal, from those who have other diseases that may cause fatigue. And I think there are lots of progress has been made in biomarkers, but we're still not quite there yet. So I'm just share with you 2 slides which show some of our own findings. The first one is our colleagues in immunology and genetics. They came with those 2 findings that I wanted to share with you, which I think are quite interesting. The first one is the colorful slide, which show the gene expression. And see, this is, I mean, without going into detail, because even it's not my area of expertise, but if we look at the first, the color, you can roughly separate you can roughly separate the response in those who have a more bluish type of response and those who have a more reddish type of response. And this means how much your genes are actually active or inactive. The interesting thing that those on one half is actually the healthy controls, and many of those with milder forms of ME, while the other half corresponds to people with severe ME and also mixed with people with MS, which suggests different behavioral genes in cases of more severe ME in particular compared to controls. The other figure is something that we found, and actually some researchers in America, in Vermont, I believe, found the same thing. Looking at immunology, we found that the percentage of mate cells, which is a type of immune cell, are much higher in people with severe MS, severe ME, as well as in MS, compared to those who are healthy and those who have milder forms of ME. So mate cells are cells that are reaching the lining of our guts. And the fact that they are higher in people with severe ME may be, we speculate, be related to alterations in microbiome or perhaps with leaky gut. When you come to the clinical markers, I just want to share again 2 slides. The one on your left side is what happens with an enzyme called creatinine kinase. Creatinine kinase is an enzyme that is involving the energy production by muscles in particular. And what we have there is the higher levels that you see, there are 3 boxes there. The higher levels are the people who are normal. In the middle, you have people who have milder or less severe forms of ME. And then at the end, the lower values are for people with severe ME. So we found significant differences between the levels of this enzyme, which is related to the energy, the muscle energy, comparing different groups. And this is a test that any lab can do, any Life Labs, you can order a CK. I'm not suggesting that everybody does that, but it's just an example of a small further finding that we have in the literature that may contribute to bringing the whole picture together. The other graph is what happens when you use when you try to measure grip strength. So this equipment that you have there, it means you use in the following form. You get your hand and then you put all pressure, you apply your maximum force that you can for 5 seconds, and then you rest for at least half a minute, and then you repeat 2 more times. And this will show the force that the person has in an objective way. So if you look at the graph, the higher one is what healthy controls achieve in 3 repeated measurements. The one just below that is for people who have chronic fatigue, but they don't have ME. They have chronic fatigue for other reasons, and they are slightly worse off compared to healthy controls. But coming down in the middle of the graph, you have those with less severe ME, with a pattern which is quite similar to those with MS. At the very bottom, you have the severe cases of ME. And not only the values for severe cases of ME are lower, but also if you look at the pattern, it goes downhill. The others, you seem to have about the same levels on repeated measurements. In severe ME, it seems that as you repeat the force, you lose power. So that's another thing that may help when you evaluate people who come to clinic with ME. So let me move to management and treatment. What we offer in the clinic here and in places where I've been working is mainly pacing, which I'm sure you know what it is about, and then symptomatic treatment and support. So then there is a question about evidence-based treatment. So is there any evidence-based treatment that will cure ME or improve people with ME? That's a question that we need to address, because if there is an evidence-based treatment, then we would offer to everybody that comes to clinic with a diagnosis of ME. So you might have heard of NICE, which stands for National Institute of Health and Care Excellence in the UK. So this is the institution in UK where they produce guidelines for doctors. And in 2007, they created a guideline for ME-CFS, so at the time they called CFS, and they concluded that CBT and graded exercise therapy were the 2 only interventions that were effective for ME. There are lots of criticism on this finding, on this report by NICE. And finally, this year, the NICE started a new guideline to review that one. And I'm part of the committee, so unfortunately, I can't say much about where we are. But I'm allowed to give you, to share with you this graph from Gerati, her Journal of Health Psychology 2016. There is a special edition of Journal of Health Psychology with lots of comments about the PACE trial. And the PACE trial is a large, or probably the largest trial where they tried cognitive behavior therapy and graded exercise for people with CFS. And The only thing I want to share with you, which I think is very interesting, and Gerati is making the point, is that when you look at the red the red bars, you see what happened with the patients who were part of the trial. Basically, the researchers decide what they were going to provide, CBT, graded exercise or nothing, or pacing, whatever. And then they decided how they are going to assess the response. So they had a protocol for that. And if by keeping the protocol, the results in terms of improvement were it was not impressive at all. You're talking about between 10 and 20% improvement. And this was not statistically significant when they compare people who received interventions that were given as part of the trial and others. However, what happened is that for some reason, the authors of this paper, they decided to change the outcome, or they change how they assess people or how they measure improvement. And by doing that, and this is what was published in the paper, they found much, much higher response rates to CBT and graded exercise. Why they changed the criteria halfway through the trial, I have no idea, and I'm not the right person to answer. But for those who have heard of the PACE trial, this has been a very controversial trial, which, with many other flaws besides this one, but which has been very important and influencing practice, i.e. to encouraging people to receive CBT and graded exercise as a curative treatment for Emmie. I've been talking about pacing as a main thing, and what I would suggest that we pace for 2 minutes. Is that a good idea? Because it may be a lot to take in for many of you. Is there any chance we can lower down the lights? Or please don't use this to catch up with your messages or anything. Just have a restful time. I'll let you know in 2 minutes. All right. Oh.
Is it too much?
I'm fine with that if everybody promised not to sleep. Shall I come back? Oh. Does it look right? Right, thanks for your patience. Sometimes it's difficult to pace, isn't it? Sometimes it's difficult to stop what we're doing and relax. All right. I like Freud when he said it this is a quote for Sigmund Freud, from error to error one discovers the entire truth. So how much more do we need how many more mistakes do you need to make until we get to the bottom of everything? So we have, in the first part of this presentation, I share with you some of the evidence that is out there. And now I'd like to go through to answer the question, can we do better? What could we perhaps do? And I would say that good quality research is essential. Research infrastructure can help, as well as working in partnership and collaborating and networking in a positive way. So when I say good research quality, and this will be very brief, I'm talking about research studies with larger sample sizes. Many of the studies are very small. Longitudinal studies, when you see the same individual repeated times, and good methodology. And it's something pretty obvious for most researchers, but unfortunately, and also we need to be fair to many researchers, because of the very small funding in this area, it has been very difficult to do research with good sample sizes. But then I just put three things here which I think are very important. One is biomarker discoveries. We need to come with a diagnostic test. We need to come with something that distinguishes people with ME from others. The other thing is case stratification or subgrouping. This means we have many MEs, and they may be different from each other. So we need to better characterize subgroups. That's my belief. And then intervention studies. We need more clinical trials. We need treatment trials to be done. And also they need to be repeated. Sometimes you have small studies to show some promise. People get excited about this, and the study is never repeated. So it's important to repeat studies and have, because if you saw the same results by different researchers, then we have consistency in this. Is very important to convince that the evidence is real and not due to chance. So one thing that can help accelerate research is investing in infrastructure. And one of the ways to do that is by creating biobanks. Biobanks, what they are resources where biological samples like blood, saliva, urine, and other samples from individuals who are alive and may have some disease like ME, they are collected and kept at very low temperature, so they are good to use for a long period of time with quality. So this is what biobanks are about, is a repository that stores biological samples. But this is not everything. What is important is there is good linked data, good clinical data linked to those, and also that the samples have a purpose, i.e. to be used in research, and ideally the samples should be shared with other researchers. And that's what I tried to do at the UK ME Biobank, which we created a few years ago. This is, as far as I know, the largest biobank which is specifically aimed at ME/CFS. We have about 600 participants at the moment in time, and many of them have repeated assessments. And at least a portion of them by next year will have about at least 5 assessments at repeated times. And this may be very rich for research, so we use them for our own research, and some of the results I showed you before, but also, and these samples have quite comprehensive data on symptoms, on other variables as well, on results of the physical examination. And what I found that is very valuable and very important, that we share samples. So each individual that donates a sample at each point in time, they will create on average 45 aliquots of blood when they donate blood, which means mini samples of blood. So if we use in our research, say 2 or 3, there are another 42 to be shared with other researchers. And this map shows where the samples have gone through so far. They have been to Australia to do for research there, to South and North America, and to a few places in Europe as well, and as well as in the Middle East. Middle East, by the way, was Israel. And we didn't create a biobank out of a clever idea by researchers, however clever, however in favor of biobanks I may be, but this actually came from a process where we worked together with people that I need to answer the question, what should be done next? And this is an idea that we discussed with them, and it's interesting that people with Emmie who were not necessarily experts, they were very keen, and this is just one quote from them, that ensure quality and linking of relevant data. And this precisely is what biobanks do. You want to ensure the quality of samples and data. You want to be able to link these two. And therefore, they say the sample should be of very good quality and appropriate information attached, because you don't know what area is going to go down. We have to be quite broad in the information, and that's what we try to do. But the people at Emmie help us to develop the idea and develop the biobank, but also they help us to interpret some of the results of our own research. And these are quotes from people with Emmie when you have a workshop with them. And people with MS were invited and contribute as well. And these are some quotes from people when they try to help us to interpret results given their own perspective. So the first one goes like, the fact that the biobank breaks down Canadian criteria and non-Canadian criteria was important. There seems to be a fairly big distinction between mild, moderate, and severe, and it almost looked like as if they were two separate conditions. We haven't got the magical cure yet, and I don't know how many years it's going to be, but we do have such a fantastic resource that will enable much more research to be done. So this is in the UK, of course, but we have been developing networks and collaborations with researchers and patients in other parts of the world, not least in Europe, through our network called EuroMeaning, which is European Emmie Research. So we have the dots here in the European map. They indicate places in Europe where there is an intention to develop a bioresource, or there is a bioresource where people with Emmie could be included. Unfortunately, with all this Brexit thing, I don't know how this collaboration is going to move. However, we also have partner with the Emerge in Australia, which is a charity there, and also Academic is in Australia, who are developing the first biobank for that country. And we have partnered with SOVEMI CFS, which someone you might know, which is a US institution who is very interested in databases and in biobanks. Of course, being here now, I'm very interested in getting Canada as part of this network. The fact that the CIHR has given funding, as some of you will know, for a network on Emmie in Canada, and I'm one of the PIs for this project, may may help with the idea of creating this Canadian data registry at least, and perhaps will help with the creation of biobank. And in this building here, in this hospital, we have a very good biobank at the Children's Hospital, actually, which is something that we like to explore, or we're starting in conversations to see if there is any room in creating or in hosting a biobank there. But of course, this is all too preliminary, and biobanks are extremely expensive. So to have to gather funding for that would be something that we need to explore. So this is about sharing samples, and this is about optimizing research. And the previous slide, and this one is about sharing protocols and standards, so that if you have different biobanks and different databases in different parts of the world, you can potentially work together with the same sort of standards, because otherwise people might be collecting data in many different ways and they are not comparable, and they may be collecting samples and process and store in different ways, so you cannot work together because of that. I'm approaching the end, and thanks very much for your patience. I just want to try to make the link between research and clinical practice, and the question here is what clinicians need from researchers, because all I've talked so far was about research, and research that is only useful if it can be translated into better clinical care. So this is about what's the job of the clinician. And every medical student will learn how to assess a patient by going through a history, physical examination, testing meaning blood test or imaging. And this is what we call data gathering. And then once they have all the information, the doctor will interpret the data and give a diagnosis, and then will act, providing a treatment, and then evaluate the response to treatment when they review the patient. Does that make sense? Is that the standard care that clinicians provide? This is a traditional way of thinking of things. However, if I think how research is helping that, I think unfortunately research is not giving the testing that we do, is not helping much with the diagnosis. There are over 20 diagnostic criteria out there, so which one the clinician will choose. And then there is no treatment there. And there is no guidelines for reviewing patients, as far as I know, with Emmie. So research hasn't been helping much this clinical role, if you think in this way. However, I think we're moving with time. This is a traditional way of seeing the role of the physician. That's something that I would propose is more modern, let's say, or more appropriate, especially for diseases such as ME. The data gathering, I would call understanding the patient. The data interpretation, it's a diagnosis, but a diagnosis of individuals of disease, not just a diagnosis, give the name to the disease. And the action, I think, is a treatment or management plan that is very much based on a partnership between patient and the health professional. And then you take the journey together by sharing responsibility, patient and doctor and the health professional and the family in many cases. They should share the responsibility for the journey that comes ahead, because you're not talking about an acute infection that will settle in a few days. You're talking about a long-term illness, unfortunately. So in this case, maybe there is a type of research with participatory research, with working in partnership with patients and doctors to carry on research, may help giving answers to this model of care that involves a close relationship and a close commitment of patient and the health professional. And I gave you a couple of examples of participatory research that we use in the UK. It's something I'm very enthusiastic about, and I hope that we'll grow up, be able to do this in Canada. Right, last slide. So the title of my presentation, if you remember from 45, I think it's nearly an hour ago, is whether research helps clinicians and patients, and can we do better? I'll leave it to you to answer the first question, to make your conclusions. Can we do better? We always can do better. But then the other thing I would like to just say, and this may be an introduction to the questions and answers, is how should clinical practice be? And I think we need to use evidence-based practice. Evidence-based means research informing what we do. However, in ME, and in many other diseases actually, the evidence is not very robust. So we use evidence-based medicine when it's available. When it's not available, what we do? And then that's the other thing is about personalized medicine. That's what I think doctors should do always. And PCM stands for person-centered medicine, which is another trend that is coming in more recently. Unfortunately, I don't see much of this yet, but that's the sort of thing we try to do as CCDP, and that's the sort of thing that I think can be a good way forward for the management of people with Emmie, or for the partnership between doctors and patients, while we wait and encourage the evidence to grow. So that's what I had to say. Thank you very much.
So with the questions, we've got people who have given us questions online. They're at a disadvantage because there's a 40-minute lag. And does anyone have the microphone?
I have it over here.
Oh, great. Okay. So there's a 40-second lag, not 40-minute, maybe even a minute lag. So we're going to, as much as we can, take questions, one online and one from the room. That good?
Okay.
So you'll be able to see the ones that are in the room as people put their hands up, but we'll help you with that. We'll call out. And is there another microphone? You've got one there too? And if you could repeat the questions, or if you wouldn't mind, because, oh no, we've got the microphone, it's good.
Thanks. So just now with your tenure starting at the clinic, could you maybe explain what sort of a typical pathway might be for an individual who comes up for intake at the clinic, and how they might progress through, and what might happen?
Okay. So what happens is usually the referral comes from a GP, the patient's family doctor. We receive the referral, and after a little bit of wait, we call the patient to have the intake assessment by a non-physician, a member of the interprofessional team. Soon after that, the patient is seen by a doctor for the first consultation. And then there are two parallel systems which are, we hope, integrated. One is the medical follow-up. So the doctor will decide if the patient needs reviews and how often. And at the same time, I envisage that the patient, the family physician will take responsibility at the same time for looking after the patient. And the other stream is the one by the interprofessional team, and this consists of mainly group activities, which can be done face-to-face or online for those who are less able to come. And there are a number of sessions that are offered to patients. Some of them are optional, some of them are many of them are optional, let me put it this way. And so the patient can decide, or the person at Emmie can decide which courses to take. So those processes run in parallel, and at the moment when this process of group encounters finishes, the doctor sees the patient again, reviews, and then discharge back to the care of the family physician. Does this answer your question?
Well, I think it opens up more questions, so I'll...
Thank you.
You could use the microphone, and so we're just going to test the microphone. I don't think it... Is it on?
Yeah.
This one is on.
It is, because somebody online said they couldn't hear, so maybe Carlo says a 40-second lag, so let's just... this microphone is good.
Is there anyone?
I'm just going to ask the question on behalf of the online.
Okay.
Sure? And read out your thing.
Elizabeth, what about these microphones here that we have?
Oh, there you go. You've got the microphones right in front of you. Just press the button.
All right. So just make sure that when you finish a question, we switch off. Are we having, sorry,
Okay, so we've got a question.
a question from the online attendees?
So from the online attendees, Paul Murray is asking, are there any other diseases that change so much over time?
I think the short answer is yes. If you think about chronic disease, when I say chronic is long-term conditions, most long-term conditions change with time. Let me give you an example, which maybe diabetes is a common enough disease that many of you will be familiar or have heard of. Let's think about a young diabetic who develops what we call type 1 diabetes, for example. So they'll be in their teens, perhaps. And the first manifestation that they have may be that they will start losing weight very quickly, and they may get dehydrated. And in more severe cases, if not treated soon enough, they may even get to a coma in the very beginning of diabetes type 1. However, when you look at the health of this individual otherwise, we look at their heart, you look at their kidneys, you look at their circulatory system, they are pretty normal. So it's just something which is acutely caused by high sugar levels. However, if you see the same individual 30 years later, their sugar levels may be pretty good, actually, if they are receiving proper treatment. But the things that many of them will present is a heart problem, a problem in the eyes, for example. They may develop a glaucoma, or problem in the retina, or they may develop kidney problems. So if you look at the same person at two moments in time, one is very high sugar levels, and other than that, pretty normal. A few years later, they will have perhaps a few other problems with normal sugar levels if they are taking the treatment. So this is an example. And if you look at, I could give many examples here, but diseases tend to change with time. So it's not clever to think about disease ME progresses. It's just a logic thing to think about, because chronic disease, they change with time.
So a question from the room? Yes.
You mentioned about working like in partnership with your GPs, but I was wondering, has there been any thought to actually establishing like an outpatients clinic connected to the program? Because as I think many of us know, our GPs don't really know much about ME/CFS, and you know, I've gone through the program, and there's sort of certain treatments I've had in the program, then you talk to your GP and it's like, oh, I don't know anything about that. Go back to the clinic and sort that out. So now I'm not part of the program. I feel a little bit lost in that, who do I talk to? So I'm just wondering if there's thought about having an outpatients clinic with GP doctors that are familiar with ME/CFS and can work with the patients, and I could see how that could connect into the research objectives that you were talking about before, in terms of collecting data and working together with these patients moving forward. I just would be interested to hear what you say about that.
Thank you. That's a very, very important question. I think we need lots of education of GPs. Unfortunately, not only GPs, by other doctors and the population in general, employers, educators, etc. So there is a huge need for further education. But so the question for those who may have missed the beginning of the question is about partnership between our services and GPs. So education is key. So you want to empower GPs to understand more about the condition and be able to deal with people with ME in primary care as much as possible with the support with the specialist service. So I think there is one limitation on our services, that you are based here in Vancouver in one setting. And I would totally agree that having outpatient clinics perhaps hosted by GPs, not only locally, but very importantly in places which is further away from here, will be extremely important. And perhaps not only some GP clinics or GP specialists, let's say, that we would be willing to help with their training for people interested, but also maybe some satellite specialist clinics in other places. So these are extremely good ideas. There's lots of work to do to get there. At the moment, I don't know many doctors here, but I think I know one family doctor is Dr. Himes that is interested and not only interested but is a real expert in the but I don't know how many more there are around that would be interested in getting to know more about Emmie and
Because
would be very happy to connect.
I just like to add to that a lot of us are depending on either like a CPP or disability payments, like from insurance companies and that. And we're really dependent on the reports and that are done. And if a GP is not very familiar with the area, it's so easy for them to dismiss sort of our condition.
I totally agree with you.
I think, if I might just add, some of the challenges we have, is with evidence-based treatment, for example. It is.
No, it is.
Like pacing, for example, is just finding a mechanism to do that in the community. It has to be somehow funded by the government, to be able to offer those services, even things like not necessarily graded exercise, but activity. Any of the allied health professions, aren't available for patients who are on disability, and these are some of the more so-called evidence-based treatments where the clinical trials are up to date at this stage, although some of them are faulty. But I just wonder what would help GPs is good sort of clinical treatment trials, and maybe taking something like Dr. Teitelbaum's work. He did a very sort of extravagant, multifaceted treatment trial, which was flawed because of all the different variables. But it's an anecdotal protocol that works for a lot of patients. That I sort of rely on a lot of that information myself. If somehow things were extracted from that and sort of changed into better research. Because things like migraine and irritable bowel syndrome, they don't have biomarkers, but they are totally accepted as clinical conditions, and we might be looking for biomarkers and pathogenesis for these diseases forever and not quite understand it, hopefully not. But we do need, more guideline-driven, practical, good solutions for treatment, and that's what every GP requires. And because they don't have that information, they're intimidated by patients because there just isn't a good guideline for doctors to be able to treat patients at this stage, unfortunately. And the time, I think the time allocation, we need special billing codes, for doctors that they can spend half an hour with a patient so complex. Just a few thoughts.
Thank you. It's very appropriate. We are very keen to work with GPs, and we hope that we can develop a community between which involves GPs with interest that we can move forward together. Thanks for your question.
Okay, so now we're taking a question from the online group. Is there anything that my doctor can be doing for me while I am on the wait list? Testing, supplements? I will clarify my question. Is there testing into causes, viruses, mold, etc., that our doctors should be doing while we were on the wait list? And that is from Tasha.
Thank you for the question. I think in terms of specifically viral infections, I wouldn't say, unless we're talking about a GP who have a specific interest in infectious diseases, I wouldn't encourage this to be done at this stage. However, what I would say is that we have plans to change a little bit the way we do the intake. And this is a continuation of your question as well, Jeff. Jeff? Rick, yeah, sorry. we would, I think the system we'd like to have implemented, but we're still in a very early planning stage, is where the GP, when they refer a patient to us, we review the patient very quickly, not the patient, but the notes from the GP very quickly. And this moment in time, we can give some, where appropriate, we can give some feedback to GP to enable the GP or empower the GP to look after the patient while they continue to wait for a specialist appointment. So this could be perhaps the answer to the question. Of course, the other way to do that is when GPs learn more about the condition, they'll be able to do that without any advice, but this is a more long-term undertaking, I would say.
Thank you. So a question from the audience now. Green sweater.
With regards to diagnostic tools that are available to doctors, they are limited. I read in one research that one good diagnostic tool for fibromyalgia and multiple chemical sensitivities, for example, would be a functional MRI. We, to my knowledge, have only one in the Lower Mainland. And it's in a children's research hospital. It's not available to adults. Are there any plans on facilitating or putting some pressure on those who have the funds to make such a functional MRI available in BC?
Thanks for your question. I think the functional MRI is an area of development, and it's mainly an area of research as far as I know so far. There are clinical criteria for a diagnosis of fibromyalgia that every GP should be able to use, apply, and diagnose if they have the minimal education on that. In terms of, I'm not aware of a consistent evidence for use of MRI for the diagnosis of fibromyalgia. So I think it's difficult at this moment in time to make a case to have such an expensive test to be offered to general practitioners on a regular basis.
Okay. Next one. From West Coast Kelpie. Can a prolonged period of extreme stress trigger a significant symptom reaction in someone who is previously successfully managing lifestyle and symptoms for a couple of decades? And extreme is capitalized.
Unfortunately, I've come across cases like that. Any stressors, being an infection, being a car accident, being surgery, being emotional stress, they can aggravate the clinical picture of both fibromyalgia and ME. So it is possible. I think once the person is free from symptoms for a longer period of time, usually they will be less prone to have severe stresses or to respond unfavorable to them, but this is a possibility. So I think even if people have significantly improved from ME or from fibromyalgia, I think it's always important to continue to be careful about their lifestyle and about the exposure to stressful situations. Sometimes they are unavoidable. We live in a very stressful world, but I think coping mechanism is something that may help you with the recovery process and may help prevent recurrences.
Okay. So now we're taking one from the floor. There's someone over here. You.
I'll try. I hope you can hear that.
Here, I'll bring this to you.
Thank you. So I had a question around advice on how we speak with our GPs. So I'm sort of 6 years into the beginnings of my symptoms, and I'm on the wait list for the clinic too. When my physician referred me to the clinic, it was it was made to be sort of the saving grace. This will be your cure-all. Obviously, in the interim, with research and knowing people who've been through it, much more around the management of your symptoms and things. So I found, as I'm sure others do, that my GP, once he did the referral, has stopped investigating. And to me, the investigation of the root cause of my illness is the most important thing. I've been getting gradually sicker for 6 years. I had to stop working a year ago. I'm still a lot better off than many, but I am worried that now my doctor isn't looking, and I don't believe the clinic, from what I've heard, sends you to specialists like endocrinologists, immunologists, to really look into what your individual root cause might be. How do we, in the meantime, encourage our doctors to keep up that process of looking to see what might be your own particular cause?
Again, a very, very, very powerful, very, very good question. I'm sorry that this happens to you, and I'm sure it happens to many other people. I think part of the answer I gave, but it's not a full answer, is that if we hear about you and we give some advice to the GP early on, this advice will certainly include the message that they should not, they need to take responsibility, as all family physicians should, for any patient with any disease. Continue to take responsibility for your health, including doing further investigations where appropriate. So unfortunately, many GPs are not well prepared to do that for a lack of knowledge, but even then, I would say that a good doctor should be able to pick up when there are, especially when a diagnosis has not been confirmed, any good doctor should be able to pick up any changes that happen to their patient and should be able to act accordingly. So I don't see any reason that it's justifiable for the GP not to continue taking responsibility while they are on waiting list. And this is the same for any condition, for any disease. What I can tell your, it's difficult to say what you can tell your general practitioner, but I mean, the part that we can help is this medication process, but I don't have the formula. Maybe somebody will have, but I think you can continue asking your GP to provide what is required, because they ultimately are the doctor responsible for you. Sorry if I don't have the magic sentence that you go there and they will respond, but.
But can I confirm you feel it's reasonable to push for specialist referrals to continue the look into what might cause it?
I think as in my presentation I mentioned, the cause is not, very often is not clear, and specific causes not necessarily will lead to specific treatments. So I don't know if you have anything in mind in particular when you say searching for causes. But I think if there is evidence in your clinical history, and you don't need to disclose anything, and I'm not asking this, on the contrary, that suggests that there is a factor that needs further exploration because this may be causing you symptoms, definitely yes. But in general, I don't think there is a general rule that everybody should receive test A, B, and C at the very beginning of the disease, except for the test that we currently recommend that GPs ask anyway, review, and then we review as well.
Okay, thank you. We're going one online, and then I'll come back to you. Sorry. So the next question, how do you know if you should try graded exercise based on health, and what profession would help you with that? That's from Janice.
Janice, thanks for your question. I think the answer is this is very individualized. So I think this needs to be based on a discussion with your physician or your practitioners that are looking after you. And this should be a common decision that you participate in. What I would say is that for some people, graded exercise will not be a good idea, and this is, and for some people it will be a good idea. In general, when people are too severe, or in people are having too much setups, too many worsening of symptoms, I would say graded exercise would be perhaps to be avoided. In the very beginning of the illness, I usually think the rest is more appropriate. However, when people start to improve of ME, then I think that's the time when their energy envelope will be expanding, and that's the time to start increasing the activity. But everybody's different and everybody has a different course of disease. So to make a decision about when graded exercise is appropriate, I think it depends how much where you are in your illness. But as Dr. Himes just said, I mean, you use the terminology activity. Graded exercise is a very specific technique that physiotherapists, I think, or behavior therapists and OTs use, but I think I think activity management is probably the safest and the best thing to do at any stage of the disease, as long as you know what activity you can perform without getting worse of your symptoms. So for some people with severe forms of ME, it might be getting out of bed for half a minute. This would be the maximum activity that is tolerated. And this activity, for example, is tolerated. The person should try to do this on a continuous basis if this is not making the symptoms worse. And at some point, they realize that this activity can be extended a little bit. For other people, activity may be, rather than maybe walking for 2 miles or even 3 miles, depending on how you feel. The important thing, the important guidance is that whatever activity you do, make sure you pace in the middle of activity whenever necessary, and don't go to the point where the activity will make your symptoms worse. Just go just as far as you can, let's say 75% of activities before this activity causes worsening of your symptoms. I think this is a rule of thumb. So people can engage in activities without necessarily being a graded activity program.
Great, thank you. Question from the floor?
Yeah, so for my first question, what I heard...
Microphone? Thank you.
From my first question, what I heard was that the pathway through would be, first step would be a referral from a general practitioner. And what I'm hearing is that for a lot of people, that is a challenge in itself, because the general practitioners are not really well set up to deal with it. From what I heard from you as well was that education is a key goal and a need for dealing with this illness. And so I'm wondering whether or not, from the program's perspective and from MECFS perspective, in terms of perhaps partnering, is there a way to reach a general practitioner who refers? There's a long wait before someone would get in. Is there an opportunity there to reach out to them? Obviously, doctors are busy, and it's a challenge, but is there a way to try and offer to them an opportunity for that introduction, intermediate level understanding, or maybe an advanced level understanding of what this illness is?
I think it comes back to, let's see if you think this may work. Let's say a GP refers someone to me or to the service. I know there is a long waiting list. We're trying to deal with that, but there is a long waiting list at the moment. Let's say we receive this referral and we soon have a look at the referral and then answer to the GP with a letter. And this letter will have general information and encouragement to them to engage in educational activities. And then we create a system to be available to these GPs, either to engage in group activities or perhaps even if they want to, if you have specific questions, they can contact us. Do you think this might work as one?
I think those would be two very good. I'm sure also if there's a library, we'll call it, of information, resources that would allow them at their own time, because they're busy, to gather information and move forward. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly we could include, I mean, there's not much on that out there. It's something that I personally have and my colleagues have a lot of interest in developing further. We need to, of course, have a capacity to develop this, but I think this is a good idea. But there are already existing resources that we can very easily put in a letter back of the GP, and those who are interested can link and go and do these activities. And at the same time, we can have these perhaps on our website. However, we need to be aware that many of the GPs will not pay much attention to that. So perhaps the patient may need to remind them, if we have a system like that, oh, did the specialist send you a letter with some blah, blah, blah? So maybe, sorry, you need to be diplomatic as well sometimes to be able to partner with GP. I think this is something that may require, the GP should be prepared to that, but if they are not, it may require a little bit of effort from your side to try to engage with them and influence them.
I know
Easier said than done, but...
Yeah, I know there's eagerness from the floor to engage in that, but for equity, we're going to take a question from here, then there's one there, and then there's one there. Question from Amashinga. We are new to the world of ME. Our daughter is 12. She's been really ill since 9 years after a bad stomach flu. The CCDP is for patients 18 and over. Is there anything similar for pediatric patients?
Well, I'm sorry to hear about your daughter, and it's a very relevant question because I'm sure there are many other people in this situation. We care for adults. That's what our expertise is, and that's what our doctors are prepared to do. I am aware that the Children's Hospital has a doctor at least who sees patients with ME, CFS, and other complex chronic diseases. I'm not, I mean, I don't have the details about that, but I can perhaps find out exact details and pass on to you, Hilary, if you don't mind, or Elizabeth, and then you can pass information back to whoever might be interested.
So Elizabeth and I both have our emails on the website, so we can liaise with individuals in that regard through our email, and you can pass on.
I don't have details about that. I don't know how it works, but that's information I have, that there are pediatricians there who would be able to see patients with similar problems than the ones you see, but in the young.
Okay, thank you. Question from the floor?
This is not a question, it is more feedback to what we were discussing about how can we reach out to...
Is the mic on?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
How can we reach out to family physicians with education? What we do have in British Columbia is Pain BC, set up for patients, helping them with persistent pain. They'll go about this in two main ways, one of which is education for all practitioners, be it family physicians, physiotherapists, chiropractors. They do this with a number of different programs. We, ME/FM Society, has in the past liaised with Pain BC, and maybe that might be one way in which we can very quickly introduce education to family physicians as regards ME/FM, because I do find that is a big problem for our patients here.
Thanks for the suggestion. I mean, as you know, I haven't been in Canada for a very long time, so I really appreciate people who have know the system better to give me the possibilities there. And I'm sure we're going to be talking in more detail about that.
Okay, next question from online, from Caroline. You mentioned that as the disease of Emmie progresses, the immune system slows down. Please explain in precise terms how exactly does it slow down? Is it impaired or is it suppressed?
I love difficult questions. Thank you for that. I think what happens in the beginning of the ME, and that's what I. There is some evidence for that. Is what happens in the beginning is what happens after any infection. So if you have a flu, if you have any infection, your immune system will activate. It will be working hard to fight infection. And this working hard of the immune system actually causes very often more symptoms than infection itself, because there are many substances the immune system release that actually can cause pretty nasty symptoms to you when you have any flu, any cold, or any other infection. So what happens in normal individuals is that when infection, when the flu goes, you still feel a bit rubbish for a few days sometimes, but then your immune system calms down and comes to being inactive, operating on a normal level, which they quiet down. What may happen in ME/CFS is that the immune system continues to be active, acting abnormally for a long period of time. And this might even be the reason why many people, after they develop the ME, they stop having colds and flus as often as other people. It's just because the immune system is highly activated. So what happens at some point is the immune system, in some people, is the immune system that there are parts of the immune system that give the message, do something about, and this is working too hard and inappropriate. But there is another part of this immune system that says, time to stop. Nothing, there is no panic here. So I think one thing that I believe happens is that at some point in time, the anti-inflammatory or the calming down immune system signals are there, and therefore the immune system come to a normal functioning, particularly in those people who are improving from ME. From those who are not improving, or those who are getting, unfortunately, worse of their symptoms, I think there is the possibility that the immune system will be impaired in a different way, and perhaps some level of suppression will occur. I don't have evidence for that, but this is a possibility that needs to be investigated. So if I can summarize my answer, I don't know the answer, that's my summary, but I think in some cases it comes to normality, but I wouldn't discard the possibility, more studies are needed, that some level of malfunction in the immune system, this is likely to happen, will happen at some point.
Okay. So, question from the floor.
Please.
Oh, sorry, this person's lined up, and I'll get you on the next one.
So mine's more comment, less of a question. Someone just needs to turn off their mic. Oh, someone got the mic on? Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay, there we go. So mine's more of a comment going back to the other person about contacting the GPs. So in my previous life, before I got ME, I worked with Fraser Health, and the way to get to the GPs is through the professional practice program. That's who the people either, and I don't know if it's called the same thing in Vancouver Coastal Health, but that's the people that train the doctors. And both Coastal Health and Vancouver and Fraser Health have teams that do that, and then you would go and do your presentation when they host these events and talk about your program, the chronic and complex disease program, and what you're doing there. And then they would hear all about it and all about ME and FM. So you would get yourself on the agenda there, and that would be a way to get them trained. And that would be the best way to hit big groups. So that would be my advice on that one. And I just wanted to say, I just finished with the chronic and complex disease program this year. I just finished up my time there, and it was probably hands down the best thing I've done. I have a great GP who worked with the program. He goes online where all the resources are. He gets this stuff offline for the resources. We're trying a new medication regime, and he got the online resources of how to titrate the new medication. He loves online resources and uses them all the time. And so I'm really lucky, although he just got audited and was told he's not allowed to see me as often as he sees me, because he sees me every 2 weeks, and that because we're very complex people, we need to be seen a lot. And he was told, oh, that's too often, you're seeing this patient too often and you have too many patients, you need to see them less, right? So that's what we deal with.
For 1 hour at a time, are you?
Oh, no, I mean, he only
That's
sees
why
me
you
for
need
10,
to
10, 15 minutes every 2 weeks, and that's why he wants to see me every 2 weeks. And then he said, he was told by the, whoever audits you guys, that was too much, so now he can only see me every 3 to 4 weeks.
It's about a coding, the fee coding system that needs to...
But still, it's a great program, so anyone who's on the list, it's worth waiting for. Hands down, best thing I've done.
Yeah, great. Thanks for letting us know. Are you in contact? I mean, do you have I'm just thinking if you have any way to email, or not only you, but other people who have ideas like yours, and even if the name of DGP, and if you feel able to do that, because if I start finding out about GPs with more interest, we can always contact them, or you can encourage a GP to contact me or us.
Yeah, I'll get in
and
touch
then
with
they
them.
may know of other people, and then roll the cascade.
Yeah,
So
I have a great massage therapist too who researches about it.
Super. We will liaise with you and then communicate through our website a process that might be helpful for you.
Okay, excellent.
Okay?
So how long do you have? Another 5 minutes or so?
Sure, whatever you want. It's your call. 5 minutes is good.
5 minutes is good. No, I mean, it's been very enjoyable.
We have...
We need to plan for...
We have a question in that area of the room.
I don't know how close we're supposed to talk to this pink thing.
It needs to go red.
Yeah, 2 questions. One is that on any of the websites that you mentioned, is there a place we can provide feedback on CCDP? And as you mentioned, giving suggestions.
Every patient that goes to see this to the program has an opportunity to give a feedback.
I know, yeah, I've done that. But I mean, sometimes months later or whatever, we suddenly have a thought that we would like to communicate.
I think you probably could contact us and say that you have a feedback to give. Contact our reception. I'm not sure if we have a specific system for that.
I think it would be a good idea.
I think it would be a good idea. Yeah, I think we need to create something like that. Thanks for your idea.
Question that as a non-patient, how can you give feedback about the
No,
CCDP?
once we have been in the program.
Because when you're in the program, there's an online
I know.
evaluation that you can do with or without your name. You can do it anonymously or not. For every single visit that you go, you can send it to them. Also on their website, they have an email that you can contact. So if you go on the website, I think you should be able to find it.
The second thing is, I'm wondering why, if there's a huge wait list and you have to wait 2 years, and we have these little intimate groups that, it sort of goes along like a snail. Like, why can't we just have a big meetings like this? Because basically, I feel that in the program, they're giving us piles of information. We get it on paper, we see it on the slides. There's a little bit of room for questions. But it's not, I just think it would be far more efficient, since it's an information passing over setup. Why not just have big meetings like this and have people come through the system quicker?
We are working on that. I agree with you. We're working on that. I think it's a very good idea. We have there is something called Friends and Family. One of our colleagues provides regular presentations, and all patients who have reached the service are very welcome to attend, and including their families or their friends. You probably know about that.
I've been to several of those, but I mean the program where you sign up, you know, there's 2 sessions on sleep and 2 sessions on brain fog, etc. Why are they little tiny intimate groups? Like why not just pass all the information out into large meetings like this to pass people through the system faster?
Right, yes. As I said, I think there is an idea that we are considering to do exactly that.
Good.
Okay. We are rapidly, I mean, there is a ton of questions from the online community, and I can see questions just, we could carry on for hours, but we're getting very, very close to the time that we committed to. In fact, I think we're there.
Well, why don't you take more?
So
3 questions, the 2 or 3 questions.
2 or 3 more?
Yeah, because I see.
Okay.
Huh? I'm fine. Yeah.
A chair is a commitment. We need to take an online one now. This is from Jeanette. What do we do if we have a doctor that doesn't do anything to work with us? I've been suffering with extreme fatigue for 4 years.
Does anyone have the answer to that? I think it's a difficult one. I think, again, I would suggest you, can you have another doctor seeing you? Sometimes the same clinic have another doctor. But I suggest trying to be as diplomatic as possible, because sometimes this causes anger. And when there is anger, there is the risk that you go back to your doctor with anger, and then this will make the doctor even more unwilling, if you like, to do anything for you. So sometimes to try to be diplomatic might help. But I mean, I'm not responsible for how other people respond, and I think a good doctor shouldn't discard people for any reason.
Thank you. Question from the floor?
Hi, I'm Janine. I was wondering what your opinion is on Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases driving this Emmie CFS model, because I think the immune system, as you were describing, is getting overloaded and then crashing. A lot of us have genetic defects like the MPHFR, we just can't get rid of it and we just get overwhelmed, and that's the fatigue, and your system is fighting and fighting and fighting, and it just crashes.
So maybe I could just jump in rather than diverting to a Lyme discussion. If I can summarize, you were asking if there was a correlation between Lyme and ME. Would that be fair?
And other tick-borne diseases driving this whole ME CFS model.
Absolutely. I think the current thinking is that Lyme disease, as any other infection, can trigger ME. And I think the treatment of people who start their ME with Lyme disease, what we offer at the program is very similar to what we offer to people who started ME for other causes. Having said that, we have an infectious disease doctor who works with us, and in cases where necessary, in cases of Lyme, we tend to ask this doctor to see the patients in more detail so they can investigate, where necessary, they can investigate more thoroughly people who started their illness with Lyme or other infection, which is not a common infection.
Thank you. There was a question over there. Oh, I'm sorry. There was a question there, and then.
My wife has been through the program, and we've been through the friends and family presentations with Dr. Arsenault. They're fantastic. I'm her scribe, take copious notes all the time. And I think that we forerun the knowledge that our GPs have by a long shot. So we have gone to our GP, and we've been discussing some of the things that have come out at the lectures. One specific thing was in regard to glial cells. being the receptors for pain in the brain and the correlation between that and ME, and the fact that low-dose naltrexone and also P-Pure can help those situations. You go and you talk to your GP about low-dose naltrexone, and oh my God, you know, they know nothing about it. I think that we have to work in partnership with our GPs, and if we can direct them to a repository, as has been discussed before, and because he said, well, I have to go and I have to research, but I don't know where to start. If we can rifle shoot, and if we can point them to the specifics on all of this new stuff that's coming through that looks so promising, I think that would help tremendously. And then we can really start to collaborate with our GPs.
Right, so we have, every GP can go to our website and go to Clinicians resources, and they can find information about low-dose naltrexone, including specifically how to use. So by having said that, I think in defense of GP, I'm a GP myself, if the doctor is not familiar with certain treatment, they should not be prescribing. Rather, they should seek to know more about it. So I simply know from the GP saying I don't have experience is good news, because they are playing safe. However, if they have the interest in learning about, we have the resources online, and I think it's another thing that we should continue to emphasize is the resources that can be available for the GP who's interested.
Okay. Question from online from Isabella. Dr. Ian Carroll at Stanford found some ME, POTS, and FM patients are showing spinal fluid leaks in the thoracic and lumbar spine, causing these symptoms. Can the clinic take a look at structural causes of ME?
Whenever we have something from America, and I was trained, and all my training, all my practice have been in countries who have a very different system from the United States, which is a public service, not a private service. So I think this is important to have this in mind, that when we have a fantastic public service funded by the state here in Canada, I think we need to look at the big picture. We need to use all resources wisely. But this is just an introduction to the answer that I'm going to give, which is, I think there will be some people with ME who, or symptoms of ME who may have specific conditions that are very similar to ME, but are not ME. So, and in this case, our role is to point the patient in the right direction to be investigated by the right specialist.
Okay, thank you. Question from the floor?
So can we?
I just wanted to...
There's a last question.
One comment. The comment I wanted to make was on somebody else's question earlier on regarding what you can do to help your doctor to understand what's going on. One of the things that I found helpful, there are actually tests that one can get done at one's own cost. And I have taken test results to my doctor. Sorry, am I doing something wrong?
Sorry, I don't know.
Is it because that mic is
Hello?
on?
Oh, maybe.
Oh, sorry.
Hello?
Okay, try again. That's better. So basically, I'm just recommending that maybe there are some tests that you can pay for yourself. For example, the complete right urine hormone test. I've done that and taken that to my doctor and kind of at least got the conversation going, like there's some evidence that there's something going on, and that can be helpful in terms of opening the dialogue with the doctor to dig deeper and find out a bit more. But I also wanted to ask you about trauma and the effects of, or the part that trauma can play in ME CFS. Whether you are, is that part of your research? Like the, obviously the switch from the predominantly sympathetic symptoms to parasympathetic symptoms, trauma can potentially play a role in that. And the ongoing stress response. So in my experience, the not being able to find out what's going on with my health was extremely stressful, for example. And, you know, everybody you turn to for help, most of them don't have answers. So you are left in this limbo, and the stress response to that cannot really come down because your body is getting worse, you're getting more frantic, there are no answers, there's no support, there's no understanding. What makes it worse, there's often stigma, it goes the other direction. And so the stress response as a result to the physiological symptoms that we experience, the psychological stress response has little chance of coming down. Therefore, I imagine it actually aggravates the condition. So what we're talking about here, early support, early diagnosis, is extremely important from the trauma perspective of this whole thing. And so, because our doctors are somewhat limited in their understanding and the tools they have been given are somewhat sporadic and the research is somewhat limited to speed all those up. Self-education, I found for myself, is extremely important. Knowledge is power. And so when we don't have, we should have at least have each other. That would, you know, be my main recommendation, that if we can't get to the professionals early enough, it would help if we had a network set up among speech.
Thank you. Yeah, that's, I can't agree more with you in relation to early diagnosis. And this needs to be part of our role at our program, and also the role of the family physician, and then where education comes to. Any stress, no matter it's physical or emotional, will of course aggravate symptoms and increase the chances that you develop symptoms that will persist for a longer period of time. If you have a trauma if you have psychological stress, the immune system responds in rather similar ways as they respond to a physical trauma like an accident or even an infection, because the immune system, there is part of the immune system is quite specific for the threat, but a good part of the immune system is quite responds to stresses in very similar ways, and by doing that, this may lead to the perpetuation of symptoms or development of ME/CFS. I think early diagnosis is really very important. We need to get better on that as doctors and family physicians.
We have a lot of questions online, and I know we could definitely carry on, but we do need to end this time, and appreciate your candor and your thoughtfulness in this session today, so thank you so much. I don't quite know what we're going to do with the questions that are lingering with the online forum, but we'll start a conversation to see how we might facilitate completion of this conversation in some manner, and have a conversation with you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I think that there may be ways to group up your questions, and then I'll be happy to.
This is a little
to answer.
A little cumbersome, but here we go.
Welcome to Vancouver.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nacul.
Well, thank you, and thank all of you and those who are at home.
So thanks everybody online and here today for being with us. It's been a very long day, I know. So, you know, all of you make your way back to resting, I'm making my way to a cocktail. I've been dreaming of it since yesterday. So anyway, thank you so much for being with us, and we will definitely organise some other events where Dr. Nacul can answer some questions for us. It's just so exciting to have you here. As you can see, we're just like dry sponges, and there's at some point we'll get wet. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, that's great. You're such a trooper. Mind you, you didn't get any super hard